So, when I was a little kid, I hated shoes. Karmically, I have kids, one of whom frequently hates shoes. And I don't know that she's achieved the level of meltdown that I was able to achieve when I was a kid. It's still impressive. But for me, it was DEF CON level. I just blew up the DEF CON system meltdown every time my folks would try to put shoes on me. And I still don't prefer to wear them, which if we ever have office hours where you're visiting me, you'll notice that I usually don't have shoes on. I have shoes on now, right? But I'm tempted. As I got older, though, I was not so reactive. I learned that some shoes will never be comfortable, and I'm not wearing those shoes. I learned that usually the best shoes actually at first are a little uncomfortable, or maybe just odd feeling. You have to wear them and break them in. You have to adjust the tightness or maybe augment them with an insole or just break them in. And after some time, you fit that shoe like a glove or like a really good shoe. And usually those wind up being the best shoes. You've developed a relationship, right? With your shoes. You probably don't think of your shoes as relationship partners, but that's why you come to church. Actually, what we do on Sundays is a lot like that. It's like a shoe. And in fact, in some ways, whole traditions and particular church communities are like that, right? When we are patient enough to overcome moments of discomfort, that's when they become really, really good. I say this by way of both instruction and warning. Today, I have a new pair of shoes for you. And I would like you to try them on. They may feel odd at first. And they may feel just right. But these new pair of shoes have to do with what we call this time that we spend together. Currently, we call it worship. We call this a worship service. Now, you may recall that I have preached once in each of the last 2 years about my dissatisfaction with the word worship. 2 years ago, in a reflection entitled, What is Worship?, I reflected on how worship comes from the Old English word worthscape, which translates as acknowledging things of worth. And that's an interesting way to think about worship. I think it opens the door for Unitarian Universalists to be okay with the word. And in fact, I think there actually is some good things about worship as it's understood popularly. I think it does decentralize the self by placing a subject of worship in the center, and that is good for the ego, to be decentralized. However, if we put too much into the center, it becomes a situation that is ripe for manipulation and easy pickings for the power hungry and manipulative. Beyond that, I still do not know that either its origin, worthscape, or its common usage quite describes with real effectiveness what we do here, or indeed what the future requires for healthy, powerful, communal, religious practice. I do not think that what we do here matches the word worship and all of its nuances gathered to itself over the centuries. And this is all the more important as we consider the future of Unitarian Universalism. As we move into the middle of the 21st century, there is a growing number of folks who have never participated in worship coming through our doors. Meanwhile, many of us have indeed worshiped in other faiths and found that worship, the concept of worship, is unsatisfying in some fashion or other. And this leaves an impression on us like sunspots, so that every time I say worship, you blink and see this old image overlaid on my understanding of acknowledging worth. So this will not fly. Simply put, the word worship does not cut the 21st century mustard. Even if it's in its most apologetic definition of worth Skype, which is free of the bow, stoop, venerate, stranglehold, worship it's just not what we do. Or not only what we do, which is good, which is why we're here in this faith tradition. And yet the word persists in our faith tradition. I have said many times that the cornerstone of Unitarian Universalism has always been evolution. The evolution of our faith. And if we are an evolving tradition, then let's evolve. Let's be bold. And dare I say, progressive. The future demands our evolution. And the future, by the way, is multi and cross-cultural, right? So we have to take into account many different styles of gathering religiously and find a sort of common denominator to them. And they don't all look like the classic conception of worship, although some do. We need to account for all of them. And so I searched. I searched for a new word, and I came back to you last summer, and in a reflection called What About Worship, I confessed that to this point I cannot find a word that carries the same weight as worship, that is also not goofy or superficial. I had not found a word that describes what we do together every Sunday. But that's the key question, right? What do we do together? Finding a word that actively, powerfully, compellingly names all that we do together. When we find that word, that is the word that will serve our purpose. That is the word that will be the name for our time together. That will be our new pair of shoes. As it happens, I have been developing a theology of secular salvation with you all over the past few years. Doing that began to reveal to me at last what we ought to more accurately name our time together. And I can tell you now, I've found it. There's nothing in here. But it's not like the emperor's new clothes. There's actually there's a concept, right? It's not actual shoes. We're Unitarian Universalists. We don't take this stuff literally, right? More than just the cool people will be able to see these conceptual shoes, though. So what do we do together? Like one word that describes all the things we do together. I've spent many Sundays wrestling with that angel and demanding its name. And I want to remind you of a few reflections that I've given to you that will serve as a representative sampling. I'm quoting myself today a lot, but it's not to, brag or anything or to self-deprecate. It's to show that this has been going on for a while. So in What is Worship, I suggested that we gather to frame, inform, and generate a religious path that is grounded in integrity, capable of transformation, and fundamentally formative to an attitude of non-reactive mindfulness. So you could tell your friends that I'm going to, and that's going to be a long discussion. Earlier this year, in a reflection called Fulfilling Our Future, I suggested that here you are invited to practice being your best perspective, your deeply connective, non-reactive perspective. In Beyond Use, another reflection from earlier this year, I proposed that we come together to find power in the practice of our faith and to find in our faith a course for that power that is a gift to the world. And then last week, I proposed that we make a habit of our stories until they are second nature, until they are subconscious and predictive, and that this takes practice, lots of practice. And that is exactly what we are doing here every Sunday at MVUU. We are practicing our faith story. So it appears that I have found a word that, at least for me, describes what I believe we, and indeed all religious communities, do when gathered. We practice. All the better that, like worship, practice is both a noun and a verb. We practice, and we go to a practice. So think of a dancer. When a dancer goes to dance practice, they prepare themselves to perform. They might practice minute technical drills or a whole piece. And in a lot of ways, it might feel as though when they are practicing, they are doing the thing that they are practicing to do. In any case, when the lights go on, the dancer is prepared, and the distinction between performance and practice is negligible. What do we practice on Sunday mornings? We practice our entire faith in component parts, in singing, relating together, praying, meditating, reflecting, in stories, and living our values. These are the technical exercises, if you will, but most fundamentally, we practice making a habit of our faith until it is second nature, until it is subconscious and predictive. Because that's the performance. That's life. So this isn't a description of some hazy ideal. This is, in fact, what we already do. This is an observation as much as it is a prescription. And all the more powerful and effective if we call it what it is rather than some misapplied lexical inheritance. So what would happen if we understood that on Sunday mornings, what would happen if you understood that on Sunday mornings you came together with all these other folks to practice your faith so that the intentionality of our practice supersedes our unpracticed, unintentional reactivity, and thereby develops our freedom. What if we understood that, really understood that we gathered here to practice and cultivate for ourselves and others this experience that I call secular salvation? What if that understanding was so central that it was the name of our time and activity together? I mean, the conversation is, I'm going to worship. Oh, the next question would be, well, what are you worshiping? But here, it would be, I'm going to the traditional practice at MBUU. Oh, what are you practicing? So, anyway, I've mentioned the word secular salvation. Do you recall how I have described what that is? And given that I think we can confidently say that regardless of theology or belief, all definitions of salvation from nirvana to union with the Godhead carry the very strong implication that salvation means that you are no longer afraid. At least that you are no longer hooked by fear. So then I came up over this time with the following litany. So Ricky, if you'd advance the slide for me, please. Salvation is the experience of being free from the grip of fear. This is not to mean that fear is totally eliminated from your life. It means that you're not hooked by it. You do not live in its thrall. This freedom manifests, becomes apparent in our ability to respond rather than react, which means freedom is responsibility. Cultivating responsibility over reactivity depends on our ability to habituate an awareness of our reactivity and live our faith. Habituate awareness and live our faith. Faith is a story of values and meaning that dispels the grip of fear and guides our ability to respond with intention rather than reactivity. I don't care if your faith is in the Trinity or in the Golden Gate Bridge or whatever. This doesn't make a claim on what your faith should be. This makes a claim that your faith serves this function. Thus, we find freedom in faith. Our faith claims that existence is interconnected and that each of us is bestowed with inherent worth and dignity, which is to say that we are not the center, but a beautiful part of an amazing whole, and that each and every one of us is invited and empowered to live without fear and so find freedom. This, faith and awareness, requires practice. And that is not easy. And I think it is best done, at least in part, with others. Now, this theology draws heavily from the secular Buddhist tradition, although I guess it's not really a tradition. The secular Buddhist, maybe one could say revolution, I don't know. But it also draws from mindfulness, psychology, neuroscience, and consciousness studies, and in fact our own tradition in its evolving heritage, sources, and principles. This theology of secular salvation also fits, obviously, very snugly with naming our Sunday services practice. Of course, the word practice has historical and religious precedent. It has roots and legitimacy. It's not goofy or superficial. I think there is room here for the atheist and other varieties of spiritual understanding. I also think this applies to and might appeal to, by the way, crucially, those who claim to be spiritual but not religious. This theology of secular salvation and the practice it points to is honest. I think it is accurate. I also think it is bold and evolutionary. And the question is, for me, which is more compelling, practicing values or acknowledging values? Which is more compelling? In the end, which is more formative? This move is grounded by our heritage. It reaches for our future and is rooted in that which we already are doing without calling it what it is. Naming it empowers it, and naming it practice empowers you. Is it perfect? If it's perfection you want, you might try the Episcopalians. I don't know if they do perfection better than we do or not, but it's at least a start. And I'm asking you to try it with me for a year or so. We may need to adjust the laces or get an insole. But for the immediate future, we can refer to our 9 o'clock gathering, which currently is going on in a sort of informal way, but will be, I'll be joining that, and I don't know why I am the formalizer, but I am, I suppose. So that will be starting in earnest, not next Sunday, but the following. We can, that service is centered on meditation, poetry, and chanting. We could refer to that as our contemplative practice. So on the website, you will see 9 o'clock contemplative practice. Our 10:30 gathering, this one, centered on singing, sharing, and reflecting, will be referred to as our traditional practice. For here, the format is traditional, and our tradition is practiced. In both instances, our liturgy will remain largely familiar. We're not going to change precisely what we do. We're going to change about how we think about what we do. So I invite you to try on these shoes. They may feel weird at first, but we're already girding for the weird, right? With our move coming up, so we're girding for the weird. So you might just want to consider this practice.